There is nothing that faith cannot make happen for you. If only you can believe, all things without an exception is possible to him that believes. My prayer for you is that no matter what happens, from today, you will believe. There are two valid ways to prove your faith. One is in the area of your resources, and the next is in the area of your health. In 3 John, it's only 1 chapter verse 2. 3 John chapter 1 and verse 2. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper, that you may prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. I keep wondering, why is God wishing? Why don't he just dish out all that we need to be prosperous? And the simple answer is because there is what you must do. And until you do your part, God is not ready to make sure you flow in wealth. Question: what must you do to be wealthy? I want to summarize it by telling you that the cardinal thing to do to be wealthy is to give to God. Giving to God does not help God in any way. When you give to God, you are only trying to compel God to bless you. Your giving does not add anything to God. It does not subtract from him when you fail to give. But anytime you give God an assignment, a responsibility to return to you a bountiful harvest. Take, for instance, a farmer who has gone to his farm and he has planted all kinds of crops or seeds into his farm. He's given the soil an assignment, and by his sowing into the soil is bound by a divine principle to return him a harvest. So when you give to God, you are giving God an assignment. You are trying to force God to give to you. Nobody has ever given to God without receiving from him. So giving to God is what you must do if you want to flow in wealth. And to give God requires faith. God is not a pauper. You can't give God your leftovers and move him. No. For you to move God, you must give God beyond your ability. If you can give God all you have, you are ready for God to begin to trust you with what he has. My prayer is that from today you will give. I want to share a testimony that Papa Godin Lindsay of Blessed Memory shared about what he learned concerning giving to God. In his book, he said, how much are we to bring into the storehouse? That's the question. God says, bring here all the tithes and the offerings into my storehouse. Why? That there may be meat in my house. And then prove me now here with your tithes and offerings and see if I will not open you the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing that your rooms cannot be able to contain. He said, how much are we to give or bring into God's storehouse? The tithe comes first. That is the tenth. Chapter 28 of Genesis verse 22. The tenth belongs to God. Numbers chapter number 18 from verse 23 to verse 30. The tenth is the tithe. God stipulates how much our tithe must be. There is no room here for mistake. 1/10 of our increased income or earnings belongs to God. And the earlier you understand that and begin to comply, the better for you. In this book he said, how much our offerings will be depends on how much faith we have. I told you about faith. How much faith you have is what determines how much you give to God. Now, the widow had faith to give all in Mark chapter 12, 41 to 44, Luke 21, 1 to 4. She had faith to give God all. And you know, Christ took note. And from that day, God took over her responsibility. In Luke 6:38, it says, give and it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaking together, and running over. Shall God give through men back to you. For with the measure you give out, so God will measure back to you. That means if you give in tens, God will measure back your returns in tens. If you give in hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, or trillions, whatever you give, that's how God will measure back in return to you. The law of giving is that he which sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly, and he which sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. So you determine what you get by what you give. You determine what you receive as harvest by the seed you sow when you sow. You sow one tiny crop of seed, you're going to have returns from that one tiny crop of seed, or one tiny seed. If you sow 10 billion maize seedlings in your farm, you are going to have returns from the 10 billion maize seedlings. God gives us an opportunity to act our faith. When we give largely as an act of our faith in God's promise, we show our confidence that God will not fail us. God says to prove him whether he is God or not, whether he will fulfill his word or not. He who proves God will find that the very windows of heaven will be open over him, and blessings that such a person cannot accommodate, God will pour out upon the person for believing him. Listen, God has promised to rebuke the devourer based on our tithing. If you tithe, God has promised to rebuke the devourer. The fruits of the field will not be destroyed by the devil. No power from the pit of hell can disrupt God's provisions or stop it from reaching you. That is what your giving can do. Your vine or your business or establishments will not in any way give you challenges or problems. God will ensure that the blessings from heaven gets to you anywhere you are. Now, Papa Gordon gave a very great illustration or a practical testimony of what happened in his family. My father and mother, he said in his book, we are people of faith. Father never had a large income, but when he brought his paycheck home, mother would carefully take out the tithe and see that it went into the Lord's work. Having a fairly large family, father's modest income did not provide us much luxury. Still, none of us suffered. Are you there? Whenever the father came home with his paycheck, the mother would remove a tithe first. That's a good one. He said we had plenty to eat, and each of us was able to receive a fair education. Then came the days of the Great Depression that affected America as no other depression ever had. The stock market plummeted down and millionaires became paupers overnight. Thousands committed suicide. Soup kitchens were established in the large cities, and bread lines appeared. Millions of people, including those who had held prominent places in the communities, were forced to go on relief. In those days, when a man lost his job, it was extremely difficult to find another. Many of our neighbors and friends suffered severely during those years of unemployment and hard times. But during that time, God's blessing rested upon my parents. Look at that, for their faithfulness in tithing. Now, father never lost a day at his job. He was able to pay off the mortgage on his own. The family benefited in other ways. There were scarcely ever any doctor bills to pay. Once, however, mother became very sick. An examination showed that she had cancer of the stomach, but mother was a woman of great faith. She refused the recommended operation, the miracle took place and she was completely healed. Even while they were praying for her healing, even while they were praying for her healing, the deliverance came and she vomited up the cancer. Mother lived another 20 years, finally going to be with the Lord on New Year's Day at the age of 80. And thus did we children have the opportunity in our younger years to learn firsthand the benefits of consistent tithing. I like this. The amazing story of an experiment. One of my friends by correspondence was the late Perry Hedin, who performed an experiment that was publicized all over America. He wanted to prove to people that the law of the tithe was the divine law of prosperity. Underline. He decided to plant a cubic inch of wheat and each year tithe the increase. He planted the first crop in the year 1940 and then planted the increase minus the tithe the following year. Henry Ford, the founder of Ford Vehicle Company, soon became interested in the experiment and furnished the land and equipment for harvesting the crops. But I shall let Mr. Hayden tell the story, for it shows the remarkable results possible in a wheat field when the blessing of God is upon it. It works anywhere. On Sunday morning, September 22nd, 1940, he said, I heard a message preached on John 12:24. Verily, verily, I say unto you, except the corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abides not. But if it die, it brings forth much fruit. Being a miller and being interested in actually proving God in a rather unique way, I was led to do something the following Thursday that has since been heard of all the way around the world. I planted 360 kernels of wheat, 1 cubic inch. It takes 2,150 cubic inches to make a bushel. So you can see what a small beginning the project had. When we planted the wheat, September 26, 1940, on a plot of 4 by 8 feet, 4 by 8 feet, check, 4 feet by 8 feet, that's where planted. Now, I told those present that in 1941, we were going to tithe the crop and replant it. I was taking Malachi 3:10 seriously, and I recommend right now that my reader study this verse as well as the 11th verse in Leviticus 25. Now, in Leviticus 25, verse 3, it says, and 4, we found that to sow the field we were to do for 6 years and let it rest the 7th year. That is what we set out, that is what we were set out to do. In 1941, we cut the world's smallest wheat field. We cut it. Immediately, we turned over 1/10 of the yield to the local Quaker church and replanted the remaining 45 cubits in inches of September 1941. Right, in the summer of 1942, we cut the second crop with old-fashioned cradles and found the yield was 55-fold or 70 pounds. Again, we tithed the wheat and replanted the remaining 63 pounds on land. Okay, that for the 3rd year in succession had been furnished by Henry Ford, who owned a large farm near Tecumseh. In 1943, the acre of land yielded 16 bushels from the 1 bushel of seed. Henry Ford himself came out to see the wheat cut and furnished a reaper to cut it and an old-fashioned thresher from his famous Edison Institute Museum at Greenfield Village to thresh it. Not only that, but Henry again furnished land for the 4th crop. In 1944, this crop on 14 acres yielded 180 bushels. Again, the 10th of the crops was tithed and the remaining cleaned and replanted. Henry Ford furnished the land for the fifth crop. It was 230 acres. 230 acres from 4 by 8 feet. Now they're planting 230 acres. In the summer of 1945, a fleet of 40 combines was sent to the field. A fleet of 40 combines. By Ford, the yield from the dynamic canals was 5,555 bushels. The value of this crop at the market price of $1.55 per bushel was 8,610.25. The tithe of 61 plus 3.3 cents rather went to the Friends Church, who in turn gave it to the Tecumseh Hospital. And now comes the interesting outcome. After Henry Ford had turned over the fifth crop to me, the 5,000 bushels of wheat were sold approximately to 250 farmers in Michigan and nearby states. They had to agree to plant the wheat, and in 1946 to pay a tithe of their crops to their own church. In the summer of 1946, we expected to harvest 100,000 worth of wheat, all from 360 kernels planted 6 years before, which for 5 years had been faithfully tithed. Mr. Henry Ford's assistance in furnishing land, machines, and labor for the first 5 years was deeply appreciated, and it was all voluntary on his part. How thrilled I was on different occasions when he might visit the wheat field at Tecumseh, or when I might visit him at Dearborn to hear him say, "You had faith, didn't you? Or you are being led, aren't you?" The very last words Mr. Ford said to me one day after we visited for possibly an hour were, "God is within you." This man titled what came out of 4 by 8 feet. 4 by 8 feet, less than a single room. And in a short while, they were planting in over how many acres of land? 250 acres of land from 4 by 8. Listen, tithing pays. If you can begin to tithe today, let me tell you, God is going to amaze you with harvests that will beat your wildest dreams and imagination. They tithe to the churches they attend. One to Quaker Church, one to... You see, giving to God pays. I pray for you that from today, you will not play with tithing. The father never lacked, even during depression, because they tithed all God gave them. Tithing is not in any way helpful to God, but it is helpful to you. May you tithe and be blessed. In Jesus' precious name. Amen. God bless you.